and I see two plainclothes cops with badges on lanyards come walking up the driveway, and I'm like, oh dear God, what's this? That was Vice Squad. So then the neighbors still weren't happy with what's going on. The neighbors called the police department, vice department, and said we were shooting a porno.
Hello and welcome to Shoot the Shit, a podcast that tells the unfiltered tales of filmmakers' craziest production and on-set experiences.
Because every shit situation on set makes for a great story after. I'm Kristen, a director and editor.
And I'm Taylor, also a director and editor. Today our guest is Jon Keeyes, a producer and director. Jon, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, thanks, Jon, for being here. We're super excited to hear your stories. We got a few tidbits before this recording, and we just can't wait to jump right in. But first, we'd love to hear a little bit more about your experience on set as a producer, as a director. Can you give us like a little bit more detail into your career so far?
Yeah, no, I'd love to. So I basically, this is my 25th year filmmaking. I started off 25 years ago. I was an entertainment journalist who wrote a screenplay and had some friends suggest that I just make it myself. I never intended to be a filmmaker. And I wrote the screenplay and decided to make it myself. It was called American Nightmare. And it came out 25 years ago, and it's never been out of distribution. It was kind of a big hit at the time that it came out. And suddenly by the second day of production, I knew that I never wanted to do anything but direct and produce again. That was it. I got completely hooked, and I was 30 at the time. Like I said, never intended to do it, but suddenly I had distribution companies asking me to make movies for them, and everything just kind of took off. 25 years later, I was primarily started off directing, and I did some writing, and then I got into producing as well. And then around 2017, producing sort of took over. I was doing a ton of producing. Probably in the last 5-7 years, I've produced 35 movies, and I've directed another 5. Pandemic was really great for us. I kind of got involved with the COVID, with all of the return to work stuff that was going on for after COVID. And so we were the second, one of our movies, Rogue Hostage, was the second movie being made in the States after everything started to open back up for COVID. So because we were the second out, nobody got sick. We just suddenly were rolling, myself and my partners and the people I were working with, we were doing 5-6 movies a year. And it just kind of snowballed. And then it gave me an opportunity as a director to suddenly go from really low budget movies to much higher budget movies, where I was working with bigger name actors, John Malkovich, Antonio Banderas, Melissa Leo, people like that. And so it's been an amazing ride, and just keeps going up and up.
Wow, that's amazing.
I love that you had that sort of love at first sight. Your second day on set, you kind of just knew this was it.
Well, it was, and a quick little funny story was, so I funded the entire movie through money from friends and family. And the first day, I'd never really been on a set before, not even as a director, outside of just being a journalist. And we got so tired. We were shooting overnight. I was exhausted. And that very first night, I went home believing that I was going to lose everybody all of their money. And I'd made the worst mistake possible. Everybody hated me. And when I arrived at set the next day, I was a little bit late because I had to pick some stuff up for the production. And so I showed up, and everybody was already there. It was an outside scene. And like all of my friends and all of the crew and all of these people were out there. They were singing, they were laughing, they were having fun. And I just kind of stood in the street watching them and realized that this was a magical moment, and nobody was upset, and everybody thought we were doing great. And I never looked back since then.
Oh, that's
I love
amazing.
that.
Yeah, that's so like serendipitous in a way.
Yeah. So yeah, I got hooked, and I wake up every morning. I've had my times throughout my career where things got really slow, and I wake up in the morning, I'm like, what am I doing? I can't keep doing this. I'm not making any money, blah, blah, blah. And then I go, but I can't do anything else. And I claw myself out of the bed and just keep going. And every day I tell people all the time, persistence, never give up. If it's something you dream about, something you're passionate about, just never give up, and you'll be able to make it. And that's what I've been able to do.
I feel like you definitely have to have that sense of persistence in this industry. That's for sure.
100%. Absolutely. Absolutely. You've got to fight for yourself constantly all the time, but you'll make it.
Sounds like you had some serendipitous moments. Things really unfolded well at the start of your film career. Would like to talk a little bit about some of those times when things maybe didn't go so well. You mentioned some sort of disasters and accidents on set. You want to take us through a couple of those?
Sure. That's one of the things, after 25 years, I feel like every time I start a new movie, I think that, I've experienced everything, and then something else comes up, and it's one thing after another just even recently, the smoke that came down from Canada. I've never had a production shut down because of smoke, but we got shut down in New York or New Jersey just recently at the beginning of the summer just because of smoke. But yeah, I've experienced a lot of things. I remember so my very first time producing in New York, a buddy of mine asked me to come out and produce a movie for him, a sci-fi movie, and we had built a big set in Brooklyn, down in the basements of Brooklyn. We built a big science lab and, big science laboratory, and the way the story kind of worked it out, there were these huge pods of water with electrodes and everything running into the pods that were running this sci-fi thing. And so the production designer had built pedestal stands for each of these. And then they took these old, if you've ever seen them before, they're like half circle chairs that are like almost like a clear plexiglass that you sit in. And they hold 500 gallons of water. And so they put these up onto the pedestals and had them all filled with water. So we've been filming for a couple of days, and it was a long, very long hallway with the lab down at one end, and we had some offices on set down at the other end. So I'm sitting in the office doing some work, and I see my production coordinators there. My second AD is sitting there. They're all on headsets and walkies, and I'm not. And I suddenly see the second AD suddenly pop up like this and kind of shake her head and freeze and look around and then run out of the room. And I'm like,
not a good sign.
Yeah. I was like, all right. Okay. But she didn't say anything. So, okay. So I continue working. A couple of minutes pass, and suddenly I see my production coordinator sitting across the table from me pop up and do the same thing. And she kind of freaks, and she's like, problem? And suddenly jumps up and runs. And I see her run over into a corner where we happen to have a whole bunch of mops and buckets and things like that. And I see her just like grabbing a whole bunch of armful of stuff, and she goes racing out of the room. And I'm still, okay, I'm like, all right, I think I need to figure out what's going on here. So I went down the hallway, and what had happened was 1,500 gallons of water across the set. So what they had built the pedestal for these plexiglass chairs on was cinder blocks, and the center of the cinder blocks, they'd just done a wall and left the opening. So these plexiglasses are sitting on the hard edges of these cinder blocks. And after 2 days of 500 gallons of weight and water sitting on there, the bottom of the plexiglass broke out. And they said on set, it was literally like gunshots. It wasn't like just one happened and we had to figure it out. It's like the first one blew 500 gallons of water. Second one blew 30 seconds later, 500 gallons of water. And then 2 minutes later, the third one blew 500 gallons of water. And of course, we've got cabling, electro boxes, the whole thing all scattered across set. And we had water absolutely everywhere. And of course, the first thing, just from a safety standpoint, of course, thank God, the gaffer happened to be standing right next to the generators. So as soon as the first one blew, he was quick enough and smart enough to hit that generator and shut all the power off, because we had at least 15 people standing ankle deep in water on the set. And what was craziest was, the director, so we're like, everybody's scrambling. We're trying to figure out what we're going to do, how we're going to clean this all up. And the director literally just looks at everybody and goes, I'm going to head back to the hotel. Tell me when we're back in. And the director took off.
Just dips.
He just dipped out. He just dipped out and left it for all of us to deal with. And so we ended up having to redo the schedule, because we had to figure out how to find 3 of these plexiglass things again. because we'd already been shooting for 2 days for the continuity. So we had to move. We moved out of that location. We went and shot for 3 more days elsewhere until they kind of figured it out. And then we came back and they rebuilt the platforms properly so that we didn't have that accident and we were able to shoot the rest of it. So that was kind of a crazy accident. Another one that was, it could have been really bad. I mean, people really could have got hurt. This is like, it's also a tell of being smart and being safe on set. And so I was producing a movie in Georgia, and we ended up with overlapping movies. And so as the second movie started to ramp up, we opened a second production office, and I took over the second production, and my production supervisor took over the first production, the one that was already filming. And so we're in this small town in Georgia, and I'm sitting at work, sitting in the office, and they're down the street working. And I suddenly get a phone call from my production supervisor, and she's like, I think you need to come down the street. And I was like, okay, what's going on? And she's like, it's better if you come down and talk to us first, but just watch out for the glass. And I'm like,
that's not a good call yet.
That's not a good call. That's not a good call. And I wasn't, and at this point, just to kind of clarify, I was not keeping track of their production schedule at this point. So I wasn't aware of what was even filming on that day because I was kind of prepping and getting my other movie going. So I go walking down the street, and I can see a lot of people out in the street, and I see 2 fire trucks, and I see a bunch of police cars. And Mandy, came down away from where the set was at to meet me. And she goes, okay, so here's what happened. And so let me give you a backstory. So there was an explosion that was supposed to happen in this movie. And we did not have a pyro permit for the movie. And so the deal was that special effects was going to do air cannons through the 3 bottom windows of this building, and we were going to blow the windows out with air cannons, and then CGI in some fire and some additional debris and things like that.
So it would sort of look like an explosion without actually blowing anything up.
Absolutely.
Get around the permit. Yeah.
Exactly. 100%. Well, apparently the special effects coordinator for the movie and the director decided to go ahead and actually do explosions, and didn't tell anybody. And so they basically put the explosives into the charges through each of the 3 windows. And it's a historic building. It's 3-4 stories tall. And the first AD didn't know what was going on, nothing. And so basically what happened was when they called action, everybody was expecting the air cannons to go off, and instead 3 explosions, fireballs burst out of this building. The fireballs were big enough, and the explosion was strong enough that it blew all the windows in the building out, and it blew windows out for blocks down the street, both directions. No. It blew alarm systems out. We had glass plates falling on police cars that were sitting outside. And the news happened.
It was a terrorist attack.
Well, so the funny part, well, I don't want to say the funny part. I shouldn't say the funny part. Most everybody who was there didn't know what we were filming. So they didn't. So to them, it was like, yay. The producers and the crew were all standing there with their mouths on the floor. I mean, there was even the B camera, because A camera was back looking at the building, and originally B camera was down on the side of the building looking up. And at the last minute, the director decided he wanted a better angle, and he moved them across the street. If they had been left where they were at, 2 sheets of glass, 7-foot sheets of glass fell directly onto where the camera crew would have been standing at.
Oh my God.
So it became an ordeal. The town took the permit. It took filming permits away. Of course, we had to deal with the repercussions of all this historic building, all of the windows blowing out, the damage that was done to windows all the way down the street. Thank God nobody got hurt. Not a single person got hurt. And it was a big enough deal that an hour and a half Yeah, about an hour and a half after this took place, I got a call from my as a director, my production designer who was on a movie up in Albany. So he's in top of New York. I'm in Georgia. An hour and a half later, he calls me and goes, "Is that explosion in Georgia your movie?" And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" He's like, "It is all over social media right now." And
It
before
went viral.
anybody, it went viral. Yeah, the explosion went viral, and the people who knew me knew where I was at and what was going on. I mean, they called from New York. I got a call from a director of photography in Hawaii who saw it on the same day. Yeah, that explosion went viral, and yeah, it caused a lot of. But I think the story behind the story, obviously, is safety. Is you never, never, ever do anything like that. And I mean, the AD team did everything they were supposed to do properly under what we thought was the actual scenario. And so, particularly when you're dealing with, well, we saw what happened on Rust with with blanks and people getting shot and stuff. So it's just they could have been that tragic and that bad. Thank God it wasn't. So yeah, we've been through some crazy accidents on sets and stuff that also at the same time could have been really dangerous. And a lot of these, the first one, the flood, nobody's fault. It just happened, but it could have been disastrous, and thank God people were smart and fast and jumped onto it. And, things like the explosion, thank God nobody got hurt, and you've got to communicate.
The explosion thing, I mean, doing something in secret like that where not everyone's prepared and not everyone's taking proper safety precautions.
Absolutely.
Were people upset with the director and the stunt coordinator? I mean, what happened with?
Yeah, so it was the special effects coordinator.
The special effects.
So the producer, one of the other producers, and my production supervisor, I mean, they laid into the director in the middle of everybody. They laid into the director more so than anybody, laying into him. I ended up I'm immediately on the phone with the financiers of the insurance company and, the state, and trying to kind of deal with all of that, putting out those fires, no pun intended. And, trying to put it, but yeah, and there was no actual legal action taken. Everybody, as we kind of worked through it became a little bit of, he said, there was some people said that it was communicated. Some people said it wasn't communicated. We don't ultimately know. The decision on everybody's side, on production side, was that we didn't know that it was happening. And that's the way all the people that kind of mattered, nobody knew, but, there was a lot of he said. So we just had to kind of keep moving and deal with the damage. But of course, at that point, like later on that day, I forgot about this. So they were supposed to later on that afternoon. The only reason the fire department was there was because of a scene happening later in the day. Later in the day, we were supposed to move to a second location, and they were going to do a fake body, but they were going to burn a body. And so the fire department just decided to show up early and then follow us to that location for the body burn. And, here we are dealing with all of this, and somebody basically looked and said, "Are we still doing the body burn?" And the fire department and the city officials are like, "Absolutely not. We're shutting this down." So yeah, it became pandemonium and chaos for quite a number of days, but definitely for that day, trying to get everything sorted out. And we still don't know outside of the producer, that the rest of the world outside the producer, we still don't know exactly what is the entire truth. So I don't really want to necessarily lay blame on anybody. I think there was definitely some miscommunication and lack of communication going on, though.
Yeah. Oh my God. That's one hell of a lack of communication for sure. But it does happen on set. And I think in later episodes, we've really started talking a lot about set safety and how important that is, and how so many people are responsible for everyone else's safety on set. But, these things do happen where, it does become a he said, she said kind of situation. And just, I think, these are moments where we realize how important communication between departments really is, and that there is like protocol for these things.
Yep.
Like who's supposed to talk to who, and really upholding that is so very important.
Yeah, no, exactly. And to have stuff like this happen too, when like for myself and for Mandy and for the producers that I work with, we're all incredibly safety conscious. I mean, Sarah, the first AC who was killed by the train, back, I think it was 2017 or so. That was, that actually the flood on set, she had actually just been killed a few weeks before that, 3 or 4 weeks before that. And a lot of my crew on that New York City movie knew her and had worked with her. And so, we were obviously very safety conscious and, before that, but especially once Sarah died and the accidents that have happened since then, we continue to try to be as safety conscious, but reality is sometimes accidents are going to happen and you just kind of have to keep pushing and pushing and pushing communication. And, now we make sure every day that we start off the days with safety meetings and kind of cover the day and walk through everything in absolute detail. And I'm standing right there with the first ADs now, listening to everything and talking through everything and trying to come up with any variable that nobody's thinking of to talk about it. And I think everybody should be doing that.
Absolutely. And I think something that really stuck out to me when I was in film school is I had a instructor tell us that God hates movies and Murphy's Law exists in filmmaking, and it will constantly show its face. And most often,
Absolutely.
if something can go wrong, it will go wrong. So with that in mind, I would love to hear about the riots in New York City and you trying to shoot around that.
So that actually, that actually occurred on the same movie that the flood happened.
Okay.
You guys
so
were
yeah,
on this one.
we were, yeah. I didn't actually even think about that, but that was actually on the same movie. There were lots of stories from that movie. But it was my first movie, it was also, it was my first time filming in New York City. I had never filmed there before. I've never even been there since I was like 13 years old. So we show up in New York City. We're going to shoot in 5 boroughs. It's an incredibly low budget movie. We're going to shoot in all 5 boroughs. And at the same time, there was riots were starting to take place in New York. This was sort of one of the early 2017 or so. And it was one of the early times when a police officer had killed. It was the gentleman who had been selling cigarettes, and the police choked him out and killed him. And unfortunately, I don't remember his name at the moment, but there was a huge uprising. It was one of the first really big uprisings. And people were protesting, and, we were there through November, December into January. And throughout the whole experience, we were dealing with picketers, rioters, and people, gatherings and, Madison Avenue and Broadway, and huge streets being shut down with people protesting and walking down the street. Well, on this one particular night, we were shooting in Brooklyn, shooting in the middle of Brooklyn. And the idea was we were going to shoot half the night in Brooklyn, and then at 11, we were going to company move across. I think it was one of the middle bridges in New York City, where we were going to move across the bridge, and we were going down into Little Italy to shoot the second half of the night. And we were paying attention to the picketer stuff only because I just wanted to make sure that we weren't going to have to deal with any picketers in the area in Little Italy when we were filming at. So about 2 hours before we were supposed to wrap and start the company move, I got a call from a friend. And he's like, "Are you aware of what's happening in New York City right now?" And I'm just assuming he's talking about the picketers and the rioters and stuff. And I was like, "Yeah." And he's like, "So you're going to be okay getting into the city?" And I'm like, "Okay, wait, what are we talking about?" And he said, "Well, they've decided they're going to shut down all of the bridges. They're going to do a sit-ins, and they're going to shut down all the bridges." And they started off at the north end of Manhattan, and then they were going to work their way down.
Was it the protesters shutting down the bridges or the police?
No, this was the protesters. They were going to do, the protesters. There were thousands and thousands of them, and they were going to do sit-ins on the bridges to shut the bridges down. Okay. And so, and they were starting off at the north end, and they had already, by the time he was on the phone with me, they were already starting to sit in on the first bridge and shutting it down. So no traffic, and the bridge got shut down. And at that point, the police, to your point, as the sit-ins happened, then the police would shut the bridges down because they obviously for safety. But I've got an entire company. I've got to get moved across into Manhattan to be able to keep our schedule. And it became a little bit like a military operation, for lack of a better word. I talked to the director, I talked to the production. I'm like, I need you. Technically, you've got 2 hours in this location. I need you to wrap in 45 minutes. I've got to get trucks locked up. I need to get everybody on the move. And so I took 3 of my PAs and I sent them all over into New York City. Sent them into the bridges, got them over there, and they went uptown to start following where the picketers were at. And basically, because the picketers, as they were moving down, one group would split off to a bridge and the other group would keep going down. And it was they were just kind of working their way down the city. And so I had them all staggered, following what was going on and then reporting into us. So by the time we got the trucks locked up and ready to go, the first bridge, our bridge that we were supposed to go across, they had already reached that bridge. So we detoured everybody to the second bridge down, got everybody moving. I went ahead and headed across the bridges. I got ahead of the company because I wanted to get onto the other side to help what was happening over there. By the time we got one truck across that second bridge, by the time the protesters got there, so then we're rerouting everybody, the entire company and all the actors. There's one, I think it's the Brooklyn Bridge, it's the final southern bridge. That was the only bridge left open at that point. And
so it's like a race against time here.
It's a complete race against time. And I'm like following the picketers, the riders down too. We got our PAs at the bridge. And literally, we got the last truck across the bridge as the protesters were 1 block from reaching the bridge. So we made it with about 3 to 5 minutes before they got there, and we got the trucks across, and we were able to actually make it in. But that was a crazy night. But there was also, I mean, filmmaking is, I think part of the reason why I like it is the adrenaline. It's the problem solving, the challenge solving. It's the overcoming the obstacles, and it's the adrenaline rush. And that was one of the ones that's always stuck out at me because we did it. We pulled it off. It could have been a disaster. And it wouldn't have been a disaster. It cost us money and we would have lost a half night of shooting. But the fact that we pulled it off and we were racing and we kind of all worked as a team and got over there was amazing.
Yeah, that sense of collaboration, kind of all working together when things get crazy. It's rewarding for sure.
Absolutely. It totally is rewarding.
It sounds like a wild few hours. Yeah.
It was definitely a wild few hours.
Do you want to talk a little bit about, what does happen when you aren't able to actually achieve something? And if you guys wouldn't have made it, there are some contingencies built into the budget. Can you kind of talk about how that works for the audience?
Yeah. No, for sure. So, yeah, I mean, obviously, or not obviously, but for, when we're building budgets and we're putting the movies together, we always keep a contingency in the budget. It's a percentage. They say 10% of the budget. I mean, I think realistically, particularly on indie movies, it ends up being 5% or lower. But you've got a fund of money that it's literally, if there's some emergency, if there's some disaster, if there's something that's happened, it's a contingent fund to be able to carry the budget through. So, in a scenario like that, and I've had it happen before on other movies where we've lost, the smoke day that I was talking about here on this last movie, when we got shut down because of the smoke, we lost half a day of filming. We had to shut down at our lunchtime and everybody had to go home. So we had to add time to the schedule later on. We had to extend schedules. We had to start maneuvering things around. In some cases, we've done where we just literally have to tack on another day to the end of our schedule. So if we were shooting for 15 days, now it's 16 days, and we have to come back and pay for it and do it again. On the smoke day schedule, what we ended up doing was we just kind of tinkered with the schedule, and we figured out how to maneuver our schedule around in such a way that we didn't have to add anything on. We just continued to shoot, and we got a little bit behind the 8 ball on that one, just because it creates that snowball effect of locations and actor availability and making sure the schedule all works and stuff. But more often than not, yeah, you use that contingent fund in your budget, and you have to add time back onto your schedule and hope that your actors don't have a hard out.
Absolutely. I imagine you guys might have had to dip into that a little bit with the water damage. Was there a lot of equipment destroyed? And You just had to
What's
replace.
funny is we didn't have to replace anything. None of the equipment
Wow.
got damaged, thank goodness. Yeah, none of the equipment got damaged. I mean, fortunately, because the gaffer was so quick to turn all the power off, the junction boxes and everything, even though they got wet, they didn't get damaged because the power got off before the water was able to hit it. So we didn't actually, outside of just having to replace those, the cleanup and stuff,
Yeah.
and replace those big things. Thank God that one didn't, because that could have been very, very expensive. Whereas,
Yeah.
the explosion, that was about $75,000 in damage that we had to go replace all of the windows.
And it sounds like a big logistical nightmare just dealing with.
Whole big
Yeah.
logistical nightmare
Yeah.
that went on and on and on and on, well beyond production. I mean, well into post-production, while everybody's back home and, we're editing the movie, we were still dealing with it, dealing with the insurance company, dealing with the city and the building owners and all of that. So, yeah, a lot of times people think that a movie, you finish your last day of filming and kind of the movie ends, but for producers and stuff like that, besides just the post-production stuff, it just goes on and on and on.
Oh, no kidding. No kidding. Sometimes it feels like it never ends. I always have to laugh at people who, like my friends are planning a wedding and they're telling me like, oh my God, it's so hard to plan a wedding. I'm like, are you kidding? Like try to plan a wedding and then plan around like the position of the sun and then everything that could possibly go wrong. It's just like, honestly, I kind of feel like filmmaking, producing, ADing is just like, I don't want to say glorified, but the intense version of event planning.
I will say though, getting married, I should have thought about the position of the sun because I have the sun in my eyes while I'm trying to say my vows. So I'm like,
oh my God.
That's what I tell everyone. Like, hire a filmmaker to,
or you make sure your photographer is actually director of photography, and they would have the whole sun mapped out already ahead of time for you.
Exactly.
Absolutely. But it's big event planning. That's a great way of thinking about it. It's huge event planning.
So, I feel like we have to talk about a particular instance in which you think you were trying to shoot in a neighborhood, and you had a neighbor who was a little bit of a Karen for you.
So yeah, and it was actually my second movie. It was the second movie I'd ever made. So I'm still also fairly new to filmmaking at this point and producing and stuff. We were shooting a movie called Suburban Nightmare in Fort Worth, and the whole movie takes place in one night inside of one house. And so my producer Rick, we decided we were going to use his house for the production. And, we wanted to make sure that we were handling everything correctly because it was a short shoot. It was 10 days, but it was going to be all nights and all within the suburban neighborhood. So the first thing we did was we went to the city manager's office. And, we filled out, for a permit, and we made sure we had permission. We did all of that stuff that we were supposed to do. And city managers make sure you talk to all your neighbors. That's going to be a big, important part of this. And so we did flyers. We kind of did flyers. Here's what we're doing. Here's what we're doing with it. Here's our contact information if you have any questions. And we papered the neighborhood, 2 blocks every direction, just to make sure everybody knew. And for the most part, the neighborhood absolutely embraced it. They thought it was a blast. Can we come out and watch? That whole thing, people hanging out in their, front yards, being quiet and hanging out. And it was, and from that perspective, it all started off really, really well. So we started filming, and the first night went fine. The second night, police department showed up, and the police officer, came out and talked to the locations manager outside, and was like, "Listen, we've got a complaint from a neighbor about noise." And we were like, "Well, I mean, we're filming indoors. We're quiet. Thankfully, the people." We had just made American Nightmare about a year before this. So almost all the same crew came out for this. And a lot of that, we were all friends. We've done some other work together. Everybody's very respectful. And because we were shooting in the middle of the night, we made sure that everybody outside was staying absolutely quiet. Partly for the neighborhood, partly because we could hear people through windows if when we're recording inside. So They're like, we're being absolutely quiet. And so the police officer hung out for like 30 minutes and he's like, yeah, you guys are fine. And he left. Next night, police officer showed up again and he's like, we got another complaint. And we were like, you're welcome to hang out for as long as you like. He hung out. He's like, everything sounds fine to me. He left. 2 hours later, he comes back again and says, we got the complaint from the same neighbor again. And we're like, okay, I don't know what to tell you. And he's like, I get it. He was being very, very cool with us. And he said, listen, I already talked to my sergeant. We're going to just go ahead and start patrolling down this street once an hour. We're just going to kind of cruise through. And we kind of feel like it's more so that we can keep telling this neighbor everything's fine, not because we necessarily think that you guys are doing anything wrong. He became very good friends with the production. And he ended up spending many of those 10 nights hanging out with us, just hanging out. So I think that was day 3. So day 4, these particular neighbors who are 6 houses down the street, 6 houses across the street, down the street, they're not satisfied with what the police department's doing. So they decide that they're going to come out and set up in their driveway with lawnmowers and drills and power saws and anything they could do to disrupt production.
And these are the people that were making noise complaints, and their solution is to make a bunch of noise.
100%. And by law, I don't know if the law's changed, but at least back then, the noise ordinance was that you didn't have to be quiet until 11 p.m. And we were filming in the winter, so we were starting around 6. So about half of our night, 5 hours of our night was before that 11 p.m. And so they would hang out, and it was kind of funny for the first few days. It was actually more amusing than it was annoying because they didn't understand that we were shooting indoors. And so we would all walk out after a scene was over with and they'd start making a bunch of noise. And then we'd all go back in and then they'd stop. And so it was really just kind of annoying more than anything. But then there was an additional night that was going to take place where I did have to move. We were going to be filming out front in the front yard. And myself and Rick, the DP, and Brad the DP, and Rick, my producer, we were like, what are we going to do? And we talked to the police officer, and he goes, technically, I can't do anything until 11 p.m. And we knew that the scene was a little bit noisy, so we didn't want to shoot it after 11 p.m. either for our own safety of not getting in trouble.
Yeah.
So I came up with the idea that if this is the front yard and the neighbors are across the street, I brought the equipment trucks around and we parked a big trailer across the yard this direction and another truck this direction because I just had to face the house with them all with the actors in the front yard and stuff. Camera went up on top of the trucks, and then Video Village was out just near the corner of the street. So that I could see out of the corner of my eye the neighbors, and the neighbors were ready. They was the mom and the dad, the 3 kids, and they were out there ready to make as much noise. Oh yeah, they had the kids involved, and the police officer was just kind of leaning against his car, shaking his head, and so basically I yelled action. We're not doing anything yet, but I yelled action, and they all start making all of their noise. Well, while that's happening, DP and the actors, everybody are getting ready on set. They're all lined up, cameras ready to go, and I yelled, cut. They stopped across the street, and the actors started. So cut became action, action became cut. And so...
That is genius. Genius.
And I was looking at the cops, the cops said the same thing. He's like, that is absolutely brilliant, because he could see exactly what we were doing and what was going on. So we spent 3 hours filming in the front yard in reverse. And so I would yell cut, they would stop making noise, our actors would work, and they were far enough down the street because they're 6 houses away, they couldn't hear what was actually or see what was going on. So we were able to pull that off.
They couldn't hear you, yet they were complaining about your noise.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
There's always at least one person who's going to be like that. It's so annoying.
There are lots, and that's a lot of budgets. And the story doesn't end there; it keeps going. But
Oh,
you're right. No, you're absolutely right. There was a lot. That's why a lot of budgets we've got into the locations budget, we've got courtesy payments built in just in case we've got to placate neighbors or pay somebody off, or we need to use your stoop for something. Absolutely. But our budget was that movie was too low budget. We couldn't even think about doing something like that. But so. We get done with that night. We continue on. The rest of the movie is going to be indoors. They continue their thing of trying to make noise, to interrupt us. And Cop continues to hang out and be friends with us. And at this point, like all the patrol officers in the middle of the night in this whole neighborhood, this area, like if there's nothing really going on, they're all just hanging out with us. And they're so annoyed with the neighbors at this point. So annoyed.
I've got to imagine the whole neighborhood has had it with these neighbors.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, because everybody else, because like literally the houses on both sides of Rick, who would be the most affected, were like, we can't hear you guys at all. So
and they have to hear now the sound of all this noise going on of the drills and
yeah. And at a certain point, the cops even went and talked to the neighbors and were like, this can't be about noise. And we're like, well, we just don't want them filming in our neighborhood, and blah, blah, blah. And it just became this ridiculous attitude, which makes no sense to me. I mean, we weren't interrupting. I get it. I've been on productions where you take over a neighborhood and it's bad for everybody, and I get it. You want to pay everybody off. We weren't that way at all. A couple more nights go by, and as we're wrapping up for the night, I think it was the end of day 8. So we had 2 more days of filming, and in the middle of the night, the police officer, the sergeant, comes over and he goes, listen, I just need to warn you guys that those neighbors have taken this to the city manager's office. And you know what? It was probably more like day 6 or 7, because he said they've taken this to the city manager's office. And so you're being raided tomorrow morning. And I'm like, what does that mean? And he goes, police department police, we're supposed to come out and inspect everything. Fire marshal's office is coming out to look at everything, and code enforcement is supposed to come out and look at everything. And if they can find anything wrong, the city's going to shut the production down. And we're like, oh my God. So we tried to button everything up as best we could. We decided, because we found out from him that they were going to be out at something like 11 a.m. And so we got everything buttoned up and sent everybody home. 11 a.m., police department, code enforcement both show up. At this point, Rick and I are on with the Dallas Film Commission, asking for help because we've got permits, so we're not doing anything illegal. And Dallas Film Commission gets the state film commissioner involved. The state film commissioner is now talking to the city manager's office about it while this is all happening to us. And so police department shows up. Sergeant's like, we're not going to do anything. This was a different sergeant, but they had all been in communication with each other. He's like, we're just going to hang out. Code enforcement started, like literally as we found out, every single code enforcement officer in the city of Fort Worth was at Rick's house. Every single one. There was like 15 of them, all at Rick's house. Yeah. We did find out the sergeant had talked to the fire department and basically told them what this was all about. So the fire marshal just said, we're not even going to bother. We're not going to come out. Don't worry. Just tell them we're not going to come out. City code enforcement came out and they found every possible thing to fine us on. The back of the equipment truck that was in the driveway was 2 inches over the line. I didn't even know this, but like the barbecue sitting in the backyard, it's illegal in Fort Worth to leave anything sitting in your backyard unattended, which includes storage units, child's playthings, barbecues. So all of that stuff is only allowed to be outside when it's actually being attended. So we got fined for those things. They hit us on a number of ridiculous things, absolutely looking for everything. Thankfully, at that point, the film commissioner of the state and the city manager's office were talking. City manager said, I have to let this go through, but I won't shut them down. As long as there's nothing illegal egregiously illegal going on. I'm not going to shut this down.
Besides the barbecue.
Besides the barbecue, exactly. So thank God we get that phone call. I'm standing by the front door, looking out, watching what's going on, and I see two plainclothes cops with badges on lanyards come walking up the driveway, and I'm like, oh dear God, what's this? That was Vice Squad. So then the neighbors still weren't happy with what's going on. The neighbors called the police department, Vice department, and said we were shooting a porno at the house. So they sent out two Vice officers. At this point, fortunately, the sergeant who was outside had talked to the Vice officers. He's like, dudes, they're like, we know, but we got called, so we have to go check. So they came in. They were very cordial. We talked, obviously not. They looked at the script. We had to pull up some dailies for them to be able to see dailies. A couple of the actors were there, that whole thing. But yeah, so she sent Vice out, and so that was sort of the last straw. That was like whatever it was, 2 nights. That was kind of where things at that point they finally gave up, other than just being pains in the asses. So our final night was done. We got through it all, dealing with this neighbor. Final night's done. We picture wrapped. We picture wrapped in the front yard to make and we actually were picture wrapping by midnight. And then the cop was like, sergeant's like, cheer all you want. So we picture wrapped in the front yard, cheered all we wanted, got done. And the sergeant came over to Rick and I and goes, so you guys are done, right? And we're like, yeah. And he's like done. You don't have to come back here and film anymore, right? And we're like, yeah. And he's like, okay, thank you. We watch him walk over to his car, pull out his ticket book, walk down the street to the neighbor's house. The neighbors had a tree trimming company with 2 tree trimming trucks out front, and they were basically illegally parked, and he citationed them, both of their cars, for being 2 inches too far out from the curb because he was so fed up with them.
Hell yeah!
So. They got a little taste of their own medicine.
Yeah.
Nice.
Oh my gosh. I love that the film was titled Suburban Nightmare. It seems a little prophetic for what you guys went through.
Exactly. I know. Yeah. That's I've never experienced anything like that on a movie since then. I mean, we've dealt with we've dealt with bad neighbors, and we've dealt with rough neighborhoods, and, we've had our share of things, but literally for 10 days dealing with that all the way up from the patrol officer to the Vice Squad. That was crazy.
They were dedicated to take you guys down. Like the amount of effort that they put.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I guess, and we found out later on also from some of the other neighbors that some of the other neighbors actually started leaving those neighbors nasty notes also, because like you guys said, also, they ended up making more noise than the production ever did, because of their drills and saws and all that kind of stuff. So a lot of the neighbors ended up coming down on those neighbors for being such bad people.
Yeah, I imagine they'd had it.
Yeah.
Well, I think with that, we're going to wrap it up here a little bit. But before we go, I want to say thank you so much for, sharing your stories. They've been just eye-opening and so entertaining. But I want to, leave it open to you. Do you have anything that you want to tell us about that you're working on? Where can people find you?
I appreciate that. Thank you both for having me. It's been a blast, and I love telling these kinds of stories. We just had a movie I produced called Kill Room with Uma Thurman and Samuel L. Jackson just came out. It's available. It's out right now in theaters. And then I've got 2 movies that I was fortunate enough to get to direct them in Ireland. The Cult Killer and The Cleanup Crew, both with Antonio Banderas, they'll be coming out in spring. And then we were talking about, my first movie, American Nightmare, how this all kind of started for me. And actually, just this week, American Nightmare came out on a special collector's edition Blu-ray anniversary edition. So it's out through TerrorVision 25 years later, basically 25th anniversary. So that's out with all brand new audio commentaries, and 20 years later, documentaries and interviews and the whole thing. So I'm really proud of that movie and the fact that just came out.
Amazing. Well, I've got a few more things on my watch list for this week. So thanks
Cool.
for that.
Same.
You're welcome. Well, this has been fun. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no, thank you.
It's been so much fun talking to you, Jon. You have some awesome stories.
Thanks. I appreciate it. I'm going to keep listening. I want to hear other people's stories too.
Absolutely.
Well, that's it for Shoot the Shit. Thanks for joining us.
Join us for the next shit show.
Subscribe here for the full version of this episode.
And remember, when it gets tough on set, it'll make for a great story.
No Longer Network.